All righty, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Oviedo City Council work session. It is Monday, August 25th. It is 5:30 p.m. We have all members of council present. We have a fairly long agenda this evening, and I would like to ask that we keep it to 90 minutes. So let's shoot for being out of here before 7 o'clock. Oh, I love it. Mr. Cobb, I'm going to turn it over to you. And is Barbara, is Councilman Hagan back there? Okay, no problem. He'll be right in. All righty. Brian, it's yours.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Tonight our first item is a presentation by our state lobbyist to come in and give you a recap of their efforts in fiscal year 13-14, but also to start the discussions about a work program for 15 and 16, for 14-15. Mr. Robert Stewart is here, and we know that Mr. Kamadi is en route. He's coming in from Gainesville. So but we can, Robert can get us started, and when Chris gets here, he'll just join right in. So I'll turn it over to him.
Since Chris isn't here, we can say we like Robert better anyway.
That's right. Yes.
You would not be the first one to have that same thing. Chris got called to Gainesville today on short notice. He is racing back, and I know he's getting close. So we can start just, I think, maybe the easiest thing to do is give a quick overview of the session as a whole, and then talk a little bit about the specific items that we've worked on behalf of the city of Oviedo. Is that better? Hello? Hello? Is that better? And then obviously any questions you've got or talk about priorities for next session would be great. I'll start by saying that the legislature, as you probably saw, just finished a special session. That special session was called as a result of the court case about the redistricting on the congressional seats. So the court ruled against 2 of the congressional seats, and this all dates back to the special session in 2012. And after preliminary approval by the Department of Justice and going through several court iterations, ultimately the 2 districts were struck down. That was districts 5 and 10. So the legislature had to come back and redraw those 2 districts. The way congressional rules apply on redistricting is that you can have a variation of no more than 1 vote per district. So to redraw 2, you have to redraw 7, is what they ended up having to do. So there's 7 seats that got redrawn. There was some question until last week about whether or not that would call for if the court was going to call for a special election now for those seats, or if he was going to wait and call it and have those districts, the new districts that were drawn in special session, apply in the 2016 elections. Ultimately, that's what was decided. So the races will go forward with the existing seats as they stand today, and then in 2016, those new lines will be enforced, although that decision may very well get appealed, and we may not know the answer for a little while longer, at least the final answer. So I give you that bit of update only because that's not covered in here, and that's, I think, important. Certainly the city of Oviedo is affected in its congressional representation on this. Any district touching Central Florida was at least in some way restructured as a result of the special session. It was working. It was working a minute ago. So very quickly, session stats. So there was, every year, about 1,800 bills get filed, anywhere between 1,800 and 2,000 bills. And you see there, 299 of those were general bills, and 229 of those, were general bills that passed from the start date all the way and got to the governor's desk. The governor ultimately signed 254 bills, vetoed 1. The 1 veto was the bill that would have allowed the DOT to increase speed limits on certain rural highways, so you could go to 75 hypothetically on I-10 or on parts by 75. The governor wasn't comfortable with that one. Otherwise, he signed every bill or let every bill go into law. The next slide, as you'll see, is really just a nerdy slide for guys like me that shows an increasing number of bills get filed every year, although the last couple of years have been a little bit lower, and then inevitably a lower number of bills get passed. Now, that's somewhat a product of a conservative legislature that at times believes that no man's life, liberty, or property are safe when the legislature's in session, and so the less they do, the better. But it also is a product, and some of the other side of that argument might be that they're passing fewer bills, but they're passing longer trains, meaning bills are getting wrapped into one. And while only one of those bills actually passes, it may be the substance of several more. It's really just, a nerdy graph for guys like me, but it does show you that you have about a 14% chance of passing a bill when you start the legislative session. So a quick look at the power structure. This is basic stuff, but the governor, the speaker, and the Senate president, they were, without question, the most important folks in Tallahassee for the last 2 years. The speaker and the Senate president are on their way out. And these will be the next two next speaker and president, Steve Crisafulli from Merritt Island, and Andy Gardner, the Senate president here from Orlando. And then more power structure faces that are important to know. The two budget chairs, Seth McKeel and Joe Negron, those are important faces any year, but particularly in a year like this where there was a surplus. They were everybody's best friend. And then two more ceremonial positions, but important for purposes of kind of the power structure, the president and the speaker pro tem, Marty Coley and Garrett Richter. Quickly on the budget, $77 billion, roughly $2 billion in surplus, about a 3.5% growth year over year, and not surprisingly the largest in state history. The funding, where does it come from? This was an interesting number for me to see. And it shows that basically the top line revenue, the money that the legislature actually fully controls, is really only about a third of the budget. That's the $27 billion that you see in yellow. The rest of it is either federal dollars that are passed through to the state or trust funds that, in theory, have ties to them on how they can be spent. Now, you'll recall from years ago, probably before we were on the team, but where the legislature was annually raiding trust funds. They were taking money from the State Transportation Trust Fund or other places to fill budget gaps. That didn't happen at all this year, but those are those trust fund dollars that, at least in theory, are tied to a certain purpose and can't be used. So it's really the top line revenue that you want to look at on an annual basis, and that's this year with the $27 billion that the legislature has ultimate control over. Where did the money go? You see it there, healthcare, not surprisingly, and education, the two biggest portions of the state budget, and the rest really is about a little bit less than a third after you take those two pieces out. So some budget highlights, K-12 funding, a massive increase, and that's inclusive of a $400 million increase in their required local effort. The legislature will tell you they did not raise taxes to meet that $400 required local effort. Local governments might feel differently, but the legislature says that that is just a product of the increasing property values and therefore more coming from the local governments on the required local effort. Record funding for the DOT, $160 million in water project type funding, millions in member projects, which were back for the first time in a long time. Bipartisan support, first time in many years that the legislature, particularly in the House, has passed with bipartisan support. The Senate Democrats or minority party in recent years has been more apt to vote for the budget. House Democrats have almost always voted in unison against it. This year was different. They have broad bipartisan support. And then just an important note there at the bottom, just for Central Florida in general, $74 million in Visit Florida funding, more than they've ever gotten before. And when Visit Florida runs an ad anywhere in the world, two things are always highlighted: Central Florida and the beaches. So Central Florida as a whole is a winner when it comes to Visit Florida getting more money. $500 million tax and fee cut. That was kind of the number that was thrown out at the very beginning of session between the governor, the Senate president, and the speaker. They wanted a big, politically easy to talk about number, so $500 million was that number. Once you account for the $400 million or thereabouts for the rollback of the vehicle registration fee, remember that doubled a few years ago, they had about $100 million left, and you see there on the screen some of those things that were put into that final $100 million. Of note, September 1 is when the rollback is effective on those vehicle registrations. So if you or anybody in the audience or anybody listening has a birthday that falls between now and Monday, don't renew for 2 years, renew for one, because you won't get the discount until September 1st. So we've been telling folks that all summer. It's a little bit less relevant now that we're only a week out, but in case you have to renew, be sure to only do it for a year. Okay, so an important one that you certainly have read a lot about is medical marijuana. Charlotte's Web was passed by the legislature, not that Charlotte's Web, although it is a great book. It's this that was passed, and that's a pill form of the oil produced by the plant that has been shown to be effective. There we go. In terms of epileptic seizures in children, cancer patients, creating more of an appetite. It's non-euphoric, low THC, and the legislature allowed for that to be distributed beginning in January when the rules become effective. It really will be longer than January before it really can be accessed, but in January the rules of the DOH is currently promulgating will be in effect, barring any challenges, and then this will begin to go forward. Ultimately, I think the legislature, safe to say, had an eye on Amendment 2 when they crafted these, and the way that the state is broken up into regions, where there's how it's distributed. All that is kind of looking at what do we do if and when Amendment 2 passes, and this is what the districts look like at a statewide level. So those are the 5 regions in which you can have one distributor or one grower for the low THC version of medical marijuana. So the Amendment 2 update, polling shows it anywhere between 58 and 88% approval. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of those two. Either way, that's still above 60. 60 is the number that you need to pass. Certainly you'll start seeing ads in your mailboxes and on the radio, on the television set, on both sides of this issue, and it will ultimately come to the voters in November. Of note, this is different than the Charlotte's Web version that I talked about a minute ago, because this will be full use of marijuana, smoking of marijuana, full THC, euphoric version that we all might be more familiar with, and that is what Amendment 2 is really about. And so the question then becomes, for the voters, whether or not that's the right thing for Florida. And again, like I said, right now, it's polling anywhere between 58 and 88%, depending on who asked the question and how they ask it. One that was important for this region, given the growth of Major League Soccer here in Central Florida, was the professional sports stadium bill. We may have mentioned this one to you last year, and some of the politics surrounding how that bill didn't pass in 2013. Ultimately, it was successful in 2014, and what you will see is a process that's now been set up through the Department of Economic Opportunity, where projects that believe they're viable in terms of return on investment of state money can go to the DEO and apply, and then ultimately the legislature will hold the final decision on whether or not to fund any of those. The one wrinkle that was good for Orlando City Soccer and our Major League Soccer investment here in Central Florida is that, and Seminole County has a big piece of that in terms of investment, private investment by the team. The one really important piece is that for this year alone, this budget year, the LBC, the Legislative Budget Commission, could make the recommendation to fund in this cycle. After that, it would always go back to the full legislature. Okay, pension reform at the statewide level for the state FRS, the House annually wants to pass a sweeping reform that would ultimately stop the defined contribution plan going forward and force all new hires at the statewide pension level into the defined contribution plan. The Senate politically is just not there. They tried a bit of a mixed bag this year of kind of a cash balance type plan is what they called it, where you didn't force anybody into the defined contribution plan, but you made it more palatable or maybe more appealing. That's a great word. To do that as a new hire. The Senate couldn't even get quite there politically, and so ultimately that went down. The Senate, as you'll see on the next slide, was far more interested this year in working on 175, 185 pensions for local governments, something that is, I would imagine, is important to the city of Oviedo. So that's one to watch. The House wanted the bigger deal. I think the political makeup of the House and Senate is not going to change much after this election cycle. So I would not be surprised if you saw more movement on the 175, 185 stuff next year in terms of reform, simply because the votes aren't there in the Senate right now to do the much broader state FRS deal. So that's something to keep an eye on. Some more local government issues, E911 modernization. there was a bill that fixes the problem that existed several years ago on prepaid phone lines. So if you have a cell phone, chances are it's a postpaid cell phone, meaning you pay it monthly. The only growing sector of the cell phone business is the prepaid cell phones. And for a number of years, there was a blackout or a moratorium on collection of an E911 fee at point of sale because they couldn't figure out how to do that at point of sale. The retail industry, the phone companies came together, they figured out a way to do it at point of sale, regardless of whether it's purchased from a retailer or from like a phone retailer or from a Walmart or a Target or a gas station. They found a way to do that at point of sale, so they initiated that that fee on prepaid phone lines effective this year, but in addition, they lowered the fee for everyone, so if you're paying a postpaid phone, you're now paying less of a fee. If you're paying on a prepaid line, you're paying a new fee, one that you were supposed to pay anyway, but the moratorium was in place. So that was an interesting one, and it'll help modernize E911. Next year, there may be some movement to change the way local governments can control that 911 fee, something you may want to keep an eye on in terms of where that money goes. Senate Bill 1632 related to special districts increases the accountability of special districts and authorizes the governor to suspend members of governing bodies when they are independent special districts. If they're a dependent special district, he had a little bit more power. This is one to watch as well. It also requires that all special districts keep and maintain a website and have a lobbyist registration portal if you're going to be actively lobbying that special district. Oh, that's the slide I was supposed to be on a minute ago. Sorry, so that was the slide that I just talked about. And then this is the one. So Senate Bill 846 requires local elected officials to have at least 4 hours of ethics and sunshine law training per year, beginning in January 2015. Interestingly, the legislature did not require that same training of themselves. I'll let you conclude what you want. There was some talk about during that bill being passed through Tallahassee. There was some talk about prohibiting local government officials from actively lobbying the legislature, and that ultimately we were able to successfully beat that back with the partnership of other cities.
You say
around
the
state.
legislature didn't subject themselves to the 4 hours of
They
training?
do. It was a bit of a joke. They do it by rule.
Right.
They require that of themselves through the House and the Senate rules.
Right.
But no, you would be now required to do it in law. They are not.
Right. 'Cause I
But
know
they do.
They do it, though.
Yeah, they do it through rule every
Yeah.
year. But it was fun to watch them not put the same requirement on themselves, or ironic, one of the two. Fun or ironic, one of the two. And Chris has joined.
Deadline for doing that.
What's that?
What's the deadline? Starts on January 1st, so...
The requirement begins January 1. I think just by the end of the year. It'll have to be 4 hours per year. You just need to show that you're doing it. And that can be done. I think there's a lot of flexibility in the way that it happens. It just needs to happen.
They're going to do online stuff, or do you have to go to a central place to take it? Or I think I asked that question. Did they define how it can be taken?
The Commission on Ethics is going to be putting together some guidelines on that, some of their ruling, so that all cities have the same sort of.
And we'll certainly keep an eye on that rulemaking and let the city know what your options are over the next year to be able to get that done. You want to take over, Child Welfare?
Sure. And again, Chris Carmody, apologies for my tardiness. As you may have noticed, the Miami Herald actually ran a series of articles called Innocence Lost during this previous year, and it cast a light on the child welfare system in the state. As many of you recall, probably under Jeb Bush's era as governor, they privatized the Department of Children and Families and creating CVCs across the state, community-based care programs. So far, that's been a successful program in the sense that it's cut costs or allowed the state to keep their budget in line. And to most people's knowledge, not a lot of issues. Kids are getting placed in homes, they're being treated well and getting prepared for life. However, the Miami Herald series of articles exposed, at least in South Florida, some major issues with the program, numerous child deaths, numerous reports of abuse that were not actually being reported until this article came out. So there was a massive, inevitable child welfare system reform. It'll have some effects here locally with our local CVC. That's why we bring it up. There's a little more transparency in the process. The good news is they also got additional money. I think if a positive could come out of it, I think the state realized that they weren't putting enough money towards this. As our state continued to grow and the number of kids in need of these services grew, the budget was staying stagnant because DCF would say we have no more money. So they got an increase of about $55 million. It also created the impetus for the CVCs to gather together in the Florida Children's Coalition, FCC. So now they're all on the same page, and they go to Tallahassee, much like a state college system or a state university system, with one voice saying, here's what we need, or like League of Cities or Associated Counties like that. So while they all have their own separate interests, they are now speaking with one voice on budget issues and policy, which will be positive for our community here as the local CVC.
From the issue of kids straight to the issue of guns, we are nothing if not good at our segues here. There was two issues that were very important to the National Rifle Association. We bring them up to you just as an interesting point of politics that went on in Tallahassee. The first was the warning shot bill that was signed by the governor and would prohibit the mandatory minimums of 10, 20, and life in certain instances of a warning shot. Somewhat funny, we were in a meeting not too long ago talking about this very bill, and somebody asked, well, what's a warning shot bill? or what's a warning shot? And somebody else shouted out, well, that's just a shot where you miss. So that was an interesting bill to watch, and one that really didn't pass with too much fanfare. The one that died, actually, the NRA priority that died that you might be interested in, would have allowed for, in the instances of a state or federally declared emergency, to be able to carry your weapon concealed without a permit. That created a bit of angst, and in another humorous, at least from the lobbyist perspective, turn of events, a member out of Miami filed a title amendment to that bill, and that would have changed the title of it from being an act related to concealed carry permits to being an act related to the zombie apocalypse. And that bill ultimately came crashing down again in the Senate, where the politics just simply weren't there for something quite that aggressive. We do expect that it'll be back next
Is
year.
that warning shot bill the one from that case up in, I guess it was in Jacksonville,
Yeah,
where the
from
girl,
Jacksonville.
where the girl got put in jail for a very long time? So does she get out now? Does she have a new trial, or?
I'm not sure where it stands with her personally.
I don't believe so.
That
I think,
was the issue that kept being talked
Yeah,
about.
That's where it came from that
Correct.
case. Yeah.
in school choice news, I know we pay attention here, especially in Seminole County, about our schools. There was a pretty broad-reaching charter school bill that did not reach final passage. It was going to, restraints on the ability of charters to expand. However, one bill that did go through, which we wanted to make you aware of, the school voucher program, expanded dramatically, and a lot of that had to do with kids with special needs. That was so the money could follow wherever they were going by schools. Not surprisingly, FEA has already challenged this legislation, and it's in the court system now. This was a priority of President-designate Gardner, Speaker Weatherford. So we'll see where the courts flesh out on that. The courts have upheld previous voucher programs to certain extents. We believe this will be upheld as well. However, it is going through the process now, and if it doesn't, if it's not upheld, we expect something will come back next year, especially with Senator Gardner taking over.
Springs protection, another bill that you may be catching a theme here. The House and the Senate don't always agree on things. The Senate was very adamant about doing something on springs protection, something on water that would set the stage for when Amendment 1, which is also on the ballot in November, ultimately passes. And that's one that I think we can say with a pretty good level of confidence that bill, that constitutional amendment is going to pass. And what that one will do, if you haven't seen it yet, is require the legislature to spend 1/3 of all dock stamp revenues that come into the state on land repurchase or environmental purposes. So the Senate was trying to get a little bit out ahead of things because of the increase in funding that may exist in a couple of years when that, or next year, when that constitutional amendment becomes law. The House wasn't quite ready for it. I think given Speaker Crisafulli, the Speaker designate's interest in water issues, his agricultural background, his land background, I think you're going to see a much greater interest on the House side in that issue, and one that they're going to get something done next year. I wouldn't be surprised.
Of course, then there's PICO, Public Education Capital Outlay dollars that not only funds our university system, which that's largely recognized with, but also our K-12 system in some of their buildings. As many of you know, PICO has been declining every year, in part and parcel because that comes from taxes on landlines. And I won't ask anyone in the audience or here to raise your hands who has a landline or mobile phone at home, but chances are most of you have ditched your landlines, and hence that growth chart is in the negative. Commissioner Adam Putnam Always been a fan of the university system. He went to our UF up in Gainesville, and he's always stayed close. He sought out to put a fix on that, and ultimately what got passed, it's kind of halfway there, and he wants to go further in the next year's, is a tax. They modified the tax on the energy tax on companies. So 3.5% of that tax that companies pay will go directly into PICO, with the opportunities over the years to grow that. What it will do is will certainly fund the bonds that are currently on place with PICO, because year over year, what some of the bigger issues was declining tax revenue base. The bonds still had to be paid out over 30 years, and there was not enough money to get there. So they were sweeping trust funds here and there year after year. They finally now have at least a solution to make sure the bonds are paid for and also to have some excess income. This, if you're a fan of the public school system or the state university system or state college system, this is a major win, because this will now have some permanent base funding that, in theory, will continue to grow. And, of course, there's some issues that were directly specific on Oviedo. As you see on the top one, the $1.5 million for the amphitheater, it was put into both budgets. It was approved and put in the final budget that went before the governor. The governor, as you all at this table know, ultimately vetoed that particular provision with his line item. And Robert, Fred, and I met with the governor's staff on August 11th up in Tallahassee. It took us a while to get a meeting. As you can imagine, they've been a little busy with the campaign season. The feedback we got wasn't so much an issue with the actual amphitheater or the ideas of the program. What they recommended, and they were very open to the idea of us getting into the actual governor's recommended budget next year when he presents to the legislature in February, was putting together an economic analysis study, which we have. They gave us the names of their favorite folks that do the economic analysis, and coming back to it, and they were fine with the fact sheet. Again, in their words, the governor had to veto something. He can't just approve the full budget. It's a campaign year. And because a lot of the projects, including our friends to the north here, I guess you would say, that got some of their amphitheater funded, had an economic analysis, they asked for that specifically and said they would work with us getting into the budget next year. So our goal is we've already followed up with our state rep and senator who were helpful in getting that in the budget, which even though there was a surplus there, I should say on record, when you see them, thank them. Getting anything in the budget this year wasn't easy. Because of the surplus, everyone had their hand at the table. Everyone was asking for something more. And as a result, they were probably, compared to the deficit years where maybe there was 100, 200 asks, this year there were 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 asks, with only about funding for 500 of those asks to get approved. So getting in the budget was the first step, which we did, and we should definitely thank Representatives Broder and Senator Simmons, and then obviously getting the governor to approve it. So we're going to continue to have those discussions with the governor's office. I know technically we're not back on a work order probably till October, but the way we see it, we're still your registered lobbyists, and unless you or Mr. Cobb tells us otherwise, we're going to continue to have those conversations to get this positioned properly for next year, so that this can, in theory, go into the governor's proposed budget as something that will help the state economically, and this also can be on the forefront for Senator Simmons and Representative Broder. Also, and we, of course, can answer questions on either one, the expansion funds for 426 and 419, we've been having ongoing conversations with District Secretary Naran Downs. She's very positive on where this is going. As you probably saw earlier, and again, I apologize for being late, but Robert covered in the budget, FDOT had record funding, and that's not just record, with any dollars. It's record adjusted for inflation. It was just a great year to have a DOT budget, and Dr. Prasad is very excited about that. And as a result, a lot of projects have been able to move forward. You've seen some of those announcements by the governor in the recent weeks on his campaign trail. We are, with some of the takings that need to be done for 426 and 419, District Secretary Downs is very bullish on the fact that we can get those put into this year's budget, some of the shifting, and then also, obviously, some of the construction. Some of those are still ongoing. They're trying to make a couple things work, so we'll keep you updated as that continues to progress. But we're very bullish on that as well, just like we were last year, and that ended up working out. And of course, if you can't answer questions on this, if not, we can move on and give you an update on some of the politics that have an effect, positive or negative, depending on how you look at it on the city, depending on the November election.
Any questions? Keith?
I have one quick one. If you go back to the foster care issue, is there any legislation that increased the licensure requirements for foster care facilities?
licensure requirements and for the actual facilities themselves.
foster homes?
No, that wasn't covered this year. There was in there, and I'm trying to see if we put it in there. It wasn't. Part of it became a sticky issue up there. Part of the legislation required educational background, like certain education requirements of the staffers working with the families. Part of the problem is that at first they thought they had to have a degree based purely in social work, and the only university, and I'll take my bias hat off real quick because I did go to UF, the only university in the state that actually offered those programs was FSU, so that got a little sticky quickly with some of the other legislators. But what they found when they actually did some surveys in making this legislation is that some of their best staffers don't have any degrees in social work. They have it in various other backgrounds, and it's just more their experience. So they expanded that a little bit, and they also put some tuition credits in the bill that the various CBCs can use. So if they find that they've got someone, this is a bad example, that's why I'll use it, that has a math background that wants to be in this, they can help fund some tuition credits for them to go get a master's in social work or something else. Regarding facilities, there were a couple issues on that as far as breaking up families. Some of the issues, especially when the Miami issue was exposed, was they were breaking up families unnecessarily. And so brothers, they wanted them to be sisters or brothers with other brothers. So some language was put in there that goes to facility, but there was no specific language on that. But if there's something you want to discuss at a later date, we can certainly look into it. The bill itself, while it was a good first step, and like I said, it was positive for CBCs in the sense that there's increased funding, and now there's tuition credits that they can use for some of their staff. There will be a glitch bill next year. There's a couple things, especially with some of the public record sides of it, and again, how they're dealing with some of these families and splitting up kids. There's going to definitely be a glitch bill next year. The sponsors have already said they're going to put one forward. So whether it's Governor Scott or Governor Christ back again, there'll be someone looking at a redraft of this bill. So we can certainly bring that issue up.
I have a question about that also. I was sitting on the advisory board for the Seminole County CBC, and one of the programs that they had developed and was becoming very successful was working towards getting that child, keeping that child in the home, identifying what the problem was and working with that problem so that they keep the children with the families. Now that takes time, that takes a lot of effort, but one thing they found was the state would only reimburse them or give them money per child that they take out of the home. They would not consider the children that they helped stay in the home. And that does take manpower, that takes a lot of time, that you're helping people. So do you know if they are addressing that issue?
That was some of it with the additional funding. They recognized that good homes, you should be keeping those children there. And again, the good of this awful situation that was exposed down in South Florida is that our legislature and our governor's office now fully understand that this isn't such a simple issue. It's not just something, throw a little money at it. And I wouldn't be surprised every 2 years at least that there's some new legislation to help tweak this, because Florida is an ever-growing state. Some would say it's red, some would say it's blue. I think Jeff hit it right when it said it was purple. We've got a lot of different demographics here, and every community is different. So every CBC's got a different fix that probably works for their community better than others. So some of that was addressed with funding, and then some of that certainly was addressed in how they redid some of the definitions in the homes. But it's not a panacea, and it's certainly not perfect, but they're getting there. Sure.
Anything else?
One real quick, you mentioned something about the vacation home.
Was that a removal of a regulation or just
It
giving
was-
home rules for the facilities? And I'm getting more at a related issue called sober homes. Is there any movement on the regulation of sober homes?
I haven't heard any specific movement on that. The vacation rentals really originated out of Flagler, St. Augustine area. The Senator John Thrasher, who represents that area, as you may recall, 4 years ago, the groups that do a lot of the vacation rentals, they kind of got together and said, we don't like that in Orange County we've got different rules than Seminole and Osceola and what have you. We try to have a little uniform system. And as you can imagine in cities, Osceola and Orange, right next to Disney, they have a lot of vacation rentals pop up there. Anywhere along the coast, there's lots of vacation rentals. And for some people, that's their full-time business. They just own homes, they renovate them, they rent them out. So the state preempted it. They said you can't have this, sort of patchwork system of regulations across the state. What happened, though, is 4 years later, now that it was preempted to the state, and there was a few rules that guided them, and I believe DPV DBPR regulated them. What you found were people were coming in, largely in Flagler near the coast, and they would take this like small house, knock it down, build a giant house that where once was a 2 or 3 bedroom, now there's a 5, 6 bedroom, and can fit a family of up to 14, 16. Lots of space, very little footprint. So now, and they built it as high as they can within the viewing, the height restrictions in a coastal community. And you're seeing these McMansions pop up in these neighborhoods, and it was just driving those neighborhoods crazy because they had these nice, quaint 3-bedroom homes. People grew up there. They liked their lifestyle. You get these giant homes popping in. So, and the county, the city could do nothing to regulate it. So John Thrasher heard from his constituents quite a bit. Travis Hudson, who also represents that district, they came forward and they said they want to get rid of that preemption at the state level and let the local counties and cities regulate it again to their liking. That was what was really driving that discussion, is that they were frustrated within their own community that they couldn't put height restrictions in on some of these if you rent it out, et cetera. They felt it was affecting just in general their community. So John Thrasher, as some of you know, followed politics, very powerful politician. That's why a lot of people think he'll probably be FSU's president when they finally make that appointment. Former Speaker of the House, former very powerful lobbyist back in the day, now that he's back in the Senate. So he says he wants to get something through the Senate. He's going to get through.
We have boarding house regulations in the city. We're not going to be impacted by that.
No, this, if anything, would strengthen your ability to regulate, because now the state doesn't preempt on that.
Yeah, so the bill effectively removed the preemption and says that local governments can now regulate these again. You just can't regulate length of stay, and you can't outlaw them. But anything else you can do.
Anything else?
The only other slide we had was called Politics to Watch. It's a blank slide. Gladly answer questions on what we're hearing, polling, et cetera, across the state. As you know, during the summers, and you saw it in some of our reports, we as members of the Florida Chamber, we go to all their interviews that they do in the various cities across the state. And what they do is they interview anyone. If you're a House member going to the Senate, they will interview you because you're not an incumbent in the seat you're interviewing for. Or if you're a senator moving to the House, that occasionally happens, and everyone else who are non-incumbents. So you see anyone and everyone who thinks they are going to be in Tallahassee next November. And some interesting candidates going through there, some solid ones that, if they're fortunate enough to win, will be good advocates for the state of Florida and will be folks that I think you'll find like-minded. And of course, that governor's race is going to drive a lot of the discussion. I think for some of the issues that are important to a veto, it probably won't matter who wins specifically. I think, like the amphitheater, when we put together the right package going forward and put together that economic analysis, I'd like to think that it wouldn't matter which governor was up there. And the same thing with the DOT funding. While former Governor Chris isn't probably near as bullish on DOT funding, at least he wasn't when he was governor, that's not to say he wouldn't be going forward. So I think for some of those issues, we'll be in good posture regardless. But that's an election I don't think we'll know the answer on until the next day. So.
Quick thing. Chris, one of the things I've talked, for about a year or two, and I mentioned it to Jason as well, but when you're up there and you're listening, is there any talk about getting a distracted driving / no texting primary offense law? Because, I'm sure you all see it. To me, I think it's becoming an epidemic. You cannot drive anywhere where guys driving down the road doing this and accidents are happening, people getting hurt, whatever. Is there any traction with that?
Legislation was filed again this year, and it will be every year, about making it a primary offense.
Yeah.
But it didn't move at all. As the data continues to come in every month or every quarter about how few violations are actually being written, I think eventually we might hit a tipping point where the legislature may realize that they passed a hardly enforceable bill with the secondary violation. But the short answer is no. It gets filed. It will get filed again. It may get a hearing, but it's unlikely to reach final passage, at least in the near term. Maybe in the longer term we can get it there. But I think your observations are correct.
When Senator Dieter got it passed, she's been one of the main advocates for this. She knew it was a shell bill at best. She admitted such in meetings. But what she did also acknowledge was that it's a starting point, and just like anything, she needs to get it out there, in her words. And she's got a few more years left in the Senate where she can give another go at this. And I fully believe she intends to make another go at this. And she's probably gathering some of that data. She knew it was a shell. She was hoping that it curb some, but I think she also knew that every day that goes by, until we get the Google cars that drive themselves, this will continue to be a problem. So. Which there's legislation about that as well, so maybe Google cars will come first, but we'll eventually fix it.
Anything else, guys? Chris, you have anything else to offer us?
Team, it's a pleasure to represent y'all. I know I speak for the team when I say that. Many of our firm's partners call Oviedo home, and it's an honor to represent a great city up in Tallahassee. We are very excited about next session, and as discussed on those last two issues that were up there, we've already started laying the strategy out there. And like we said, we're not worried about when the work order comes in. Until you guys tell us to stop, we're going to keep working because we want to see it get done. And of course, when you put together that work order, please give us a call in helping developing some of the other issues you may want to put on there so that we can make sure we put Oviedo's best foot forward.
Chris, thank you very much for coming out and rushing back from Tallahassee.
Not a problem.
OPD didn't pull you over on Mitchell Hammock or anything?
Yeah, I wasn't texting, but I might have broken it up the wrong way.
Robert, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Great job.
Thank you for the great update. We appreciate it. Mr. Cobb, we'll go back to you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, guys.
I'm going to have Ms. Hayes come on up.
She's got a lot of books.
She does.
Councilman Shank is shuddering over there.
I don't have one, that's a good thing. I don't have one.
Tonight is it's funny, it's our second discussion, but it's really our first discussion. We met in July
You have 50 minutes left.
to basically set the tentative millage rate. Your discussion centered around the general fund, and that was what we focused on at your meeting in July. And we gave you a proposed budget that was balanced to the current millage rate of 4.8626. We did ask you for an increase of 0.1808 to create a tentative millage of 5.0434, which, if you adding in the GOB millage, it gave us 5.2980. And we went through as far as what our needs were, and council established the tentative millage as we recommended. Ms. Hayes and the budget team have since been refining numbers and putting together a program for 14-15 based on council's direction at the July meeting. So I'm going to take a step back tonight rather than give you the preliminaries again. I'm going to actually jump straight into Ms. Hayes and let her walk you through, because we're going to go through the entire budget, not just the general fund. She's also going to take you through the other funds as well. So I'm going to give her as much time as possible and turn it over to her.
Good evening.
Good evening, Robin.
I'm not going to go through every page of the budget, so don't worry.
Thank you for the clarification. to be frank, I don't think the five of us are going to let you. But.
No worries. What I did this year in preparing the agenda item is kind of look at the big picture for you, the different funds, the different major funds that we discuss and talk about each year. And because we spent so much time on the general fund because of the millage rate, at the initial meeting, July 28th, I thought we'd kind of backtrack and look at your enterprise fund or water and sewer. And then I would look at the stormwater fund, the building services fund, and then we'll just kind of tidy up the end of it with the general fund. But I'll be glad to answer any questions you have on any other funds. But I think this is just kind of a broad picture of what, where we have our funding at. I'll be glad to reference the attachment as we go through it, kind of like we did the first meeting as best I can. So I'll kind of start off that way. The first 6 attachments, I made a note on the memo. The first 6 are really from the first meeting. Those were just reference points just so that you would have something. Obviously, if you need something different, we have it. Kelly will be able to put all the attachments up here for us. We'll start out with attachment 7. And I mentioned to the mayor the other night, if I might mention it now, we are replacing all 3 TVs. So if you will bear with us about another month, we're hoping to have this problem corrected, which we have an issue with old technology and new technology and the box that runs the 2 together over here. So we'll be replacing all 3 TVs, and I think that will almost complete a full audio and video here, most everything anyway. So hopefully we'll have this corrected and fixed for you in the next couple meetings.
Can I ask you one quick question, just to set the context?
Sure.
For the enterprise funds, are all the enterprise funds self-sufficient without contributions from the general fund?
Yes, sir.
I can go back to Silvia.
Okay.
Britain's gone, okay, we're done. Next, aye.
The beginning of this, I started out with water and wastewater fund.
And so we should be on attachment 7, correct?
Well, will be attachment 7, which looks like, water, wastewater fund, 401 fund. It's a P&L. We try to give you some examples of, or the total fund, excuse me. And the beginning of the memo starts on, I just kind of talk about summary information. I give you an idea of the cost from a personnel perspective. I give you a cost of the operating cost within that schedule also. And then I take a little bit of time and go through the transfers, because usually those are where the questions might be. A good example here is the fact that we do make a transfer to the general fund from the 401 fund. But what that does is that funds the services that are, happen within the general fund employees, how they service the 401 employees, and or services of other operating costs. It also takes into consideration the payment in lieu of taxes, which I think I've had some questions for that in the past at the Alafaya water plant, and some sewer franchise fees. So we take that, we do it as one transfer. We don't have a lot of other transfers going on anymore, and we explain that, we detail it. We will adjust this a little bit if there's any numbers to adjust, because the 10% is based on total general fund employees and operating costs, which includes personnel. So sometimes that'll change a little bit, but it will not change very much. And then I kind of go over your debt service just briefly to let you know that that's for your utility bonds, your SRF loans, and some equipment and so forth. And we have that detailed to some degree within the schedule with its own 401, and I could always provide you more information if you so desire that.
Those utility bonds are separate from general obligation bonds?
Yes, sir. Yes. The other small transfers that are in there, I kind of explained them just kind of briefly. There's some transfers for a vehicle replacement fund. Again, we're trying to replenish anything that is purchased from an amortization schedule throughout the year and so forth. So those funds go into a replacement fund. There's a renewal and replacement fund. 401 fund does fund that particular fund. We have increased those transfers over the past 2 years, trying to provide them some more, obviously, funding to take care of things such as the lift stations and things that are happening out there, but also to build that fund up. And it's also, there's requirements from our budget guidelines that force us to have a reserve in that fund. So we kind of go over that information. And then I provide you some information on the contingency, just that they're establishing a reserve each year, but there's also a contingency set up so that the Public Works Director and the City Manager can authorize the use of those contingency funds for a project that may need additional funding because the scope changes a little bit, and it's still within the City Manager's $35,000 signature authority, or the Department Director's $10,000. That contingency is not a fund balance. It's already come out of the fund balance and set into a separate account. And we have tried to do that through most of the enterprise funds so that they don't have to come back to council really and wait another 2 weeks or 4 weeks if it's an operating function you've already approved and it's just additional money that's needed to finish a project. So the theory there that in overall the true change of scope hasn't changed, it's just something happened that caused a little change. So that's just kind of a brief summary of the 401.
Let me just ask a question. Any questions on it?
401 is
For-
potable water, or is
it-
it through wastewater?
It is water, wastewater, and reclaimed water.
I have a quick question on that. Does this fund pay for the reuse water distribution
Yes,
expansion?
yes.
Or
And
is
you
it-
have a little bit come out of another fund too, I believe, but most of it comes out of 401.
Is that in this spreadsheet?
It will be in the budget book. It'll summarize in the spreadsheet, but it'll be actually in the budget book details. If you want to see the distribution, I can send you the page numbers.
I'd be interested, not tonight, looking at what the plan for the next year is on increasing the distribution.
Would that be in capital improvement?
Yeah, I'm just asking who pays for it.
Oh, good question. Robin, I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, is everybody else done? Our GOB debt service, why is it climbing? Seems to have gone from 2.2 million to 3.7 million in the budget this year. That's a big jump.
On the
Into
general
fund transfers,
obligation,
into fund transfers and reserves. General obligation debt service, no, utility debt service. It's 1, 2, 3, fourth line.
that's true, yes. Kelly reminded me that that is because we adjusted the date. Last year, we brought to you the change in when we were going to pay all of our debt. Now we pay on 10/1 and 4/1. In prior years, we were paying on 9/30. So this year, we will have an additional, yes, it's a realignment. And we brought that back to council, I'm going to say back in March.
That's fine. It just jumped out at me.
So it will
It'll just level
realign
itself off
trend.
again.
That's right, realign.
So it's not that the debt service necessarily went up, just the way we're paying it this fiscal
timing.
year. Gets
Looking
bigger.
at that 2.1 versus the 3.7?
Yes. Now, why did it drop to 2.1 from 3.9 prior year?
Because, again, the timing.
Because of the timing
We actually
issue.
were able to put some money into fund balance because we didn't make one of the payments, yes. Because of timing, we made the payment, excuse me. It was the timing of the payment.
So the payment every year should be about
Now,
just under $4 million.
that's correct.
Okay.
I
No
mean,
matter how
it
you
could change
guys
a little
slice it.
bit. A couple of our loans are based on, a little higher in principal versus interest, so
that's
it'll adjust a little bit.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions, guys? No. Thank you, Robin.
Okay, and Exhibit 8 or Attachment 8 actually has the changes, so that you can actually go through and see each of those are changes, that we may have had from the presentation that we gave you back on July 28th. So that represents any changes that we went through.
Anything glaring in here that we should make note of that you'd like to point out to us, or is it all pretty mundane?
They're pretty, we increased the contingency, but that's due to the refinancing that Mr. Boot brought to you a few weeks ago, so that allowed a little bit more funds to go to your contingency accounts. So that's the $291,000 and the $150,000. I'm trying to recall what that one is. Oh, okay. Yes. So we have a few changes that happen, from time to time, or since we originally budget back in June, so we make some adjustments. So those were really the only major problems or issues we had that we had to refinance or readjust.
Okay.
And in this case, it was a readjustment and benefited.
Mr. Cobb, we have a new company doing our rate studies, or has that come before us yet?
It's in progress. It's in process.
We've had one formal meeting with the new rate consultant so far with Wildan, and we have been updating them with the new budget since our first meeting, and as well as with actual performance of this fiscal year. We plan on meeting with them again late September, and we will be finalizing the numbers at that point in time. We will then be probably having a work session sometime in, I want to say, mid to late October, which time we'll make a determination of what direction we need to go in.
Thank you.
So that's attachment number 8. This refers to the changes. Most of those are just tweaking changes that we made, the liability accounts, we moved the position around, this and that type of thing. And then attachment 9 also refers to some changes. Again, 403, that's the debt perspective, and this is the adjustments we made, again, to reflect the $291,000 there. So we just show you what accounting streams individually that we changed. That would have also been reflected in the agenda memo that Mr. Boo brought to you when we did the refinancing. Attachment 9. Sorry, I'm still on
Attachment
attachment 8.
8.
I apologize. Page 2 of attachment 8. Sorry about
He
that.
saw stormwater, got all excited.
Yes.
I was looking for the 291.
Page 2 of that. And then page 3 of the same one, it addresses the 406 change, the $150,000. And 406 is your renewal and replacement fund. as an increase, it reflects the increase into 401, so it increases their fund balance. Question? If it's okay, I go ahead to stormwater? Okay. Stormwater fund, I just give you a brief summary of the revenue, the fact that this fund is made up of the $7 per month that's assessed per home within the city, billable, and that the revenues reflected in attachment 9 there reflect the stormwater operating revenue, the $1.5 million, and then the interest. It's a very simple fund in this respect. It is a special revenue fund. It is not an enterprise fund. In some areas, you will find this is an enterprise fund, but here at the city, it is a special revenue fund. So,
I thought we changed that. Did we change it from an enterprise fund a few years ago?
not,
Why did we switch it back and forth? Much quicker. Sorry, Terry. Might as well just take a permit C with us.
I can't answer the question as to why it was switched a few years ago.
It was before your time?
It was before my time.
Okay.
But really, it's accounting, its nature is enterprise in nature, and it should be treated as an enterprise fund. It has its own assets, and should be an enterprise fund. That's all I can say. I don't know why it was switched
I
back.
think if I remember right, it would give us more flexibility in managing it.
I don't remember.
it's very restricted.
I
so-
think it's much more flexible as an enterprise fund than it is as a restricted revenue fund, which is its current nature. Right.
Give your-
Does this fund pay for street closures?
The stormwater,
Yes.
yes, it is. Limited dollars.
I thought I remembered in the capital plan, either this year or 16, they used street cleaning. You hope so?
I believe it's in this year's, Joe, you also have a position attached to it? No? Okay, just to. I can look that up if you'd like, Mr. Burton.
No, I'm fine. Every year I get hit from the guys that want us to lease that out to them, so
Carmine.
Carmine, if there's a cost benefit and it's more beneficial to have our own, I appreciate that information. So Carmine will follow me.
USA Street Cleaning or something is the name of this company. We can't go to Florida League without getting cornered by them.
So they would provide the service. I think they reimburse for it.
Okay. Into that. But this fund is able to, as you can see through the process here, the revenues 1.8 do obviously balance, but there's also a transfer to the general fund of $140,000, and that's just, again, that's the same thing that you have in the 401, supporting the services of, exactly, yes, sir.
HRIT and everything else.
That's correct, yes, sir. So taking care of all the administrative functions of that. And we're able to even put in this fund $59,000 into the contingency, so it is able to stand on its own and put some funding into a contingency account. There were two transfers. The other transfer is the transfer to the insurance fund that's in there. Again, those are just your health insurance due to the personnel that reside in that fund. So it's very limited on what is being transferred out of there, and the operating. Limited there. Got your Emirates.
Are we keeping up with the O&M as well as the improvement projects out of this fund? Yeah. There was a discussion a couple of years ago, maybe last year, that we were almost depleting this, if the improvement projects we were doing, are we getting healthy again?
As far as reserves goes for capital projects, I believe we don't have sufficient to complete all on our list, no.
Okay.
But we kind of, we address them as a, from an operational standpoint, need, what are the actual critical issues, and do they relate back to the projects? That's how we kind of address them right now.
So right now, we're basically maintaining the system?
Yes, sir.
We're not looking for,
We are attacking those projects as we can get to them, but it's more like one at a time, it's not several.
Yeah, there's Allen Avenue,
Yeah,
material.
all in avenues right now, there's 2 others that are designed,
okay.
but
those are
construction
waiting for-
costs are going up, so the ability to be able to construct them is,
We've got to build up the funds out of
Yes,
this
sir.
fund to do that?
exactly.
Okay. How long is the list?
Originally it was 42 projects.
Okay.
I believe it's down to 20-something.
Okay.
However, you have to understand when out of that book, a lot of those were nuisance problems. They're not necessarily what I would call drainage issues. You might have standing water. We don't have an overall flooding problem in the city. We attack operational problems. I mean, we're not in any kind of critical need as far as dire situation anywhere out there.
Is it time to go and reevaluate the list?
We have looked at that. That is something that's on my mind as far as doing an update to that master plan, as far as a critical analysis. But like I said, from an operational standpoint, we don't see anywhere where we're having, any kind of property damage or anything on a consistent basis.
We still got our CRA, the rating with the FEMA rating?
Oh, yes, sir. That actually improved.
Our CRS rating.
CRS, okay. All right. well,
Residents in the special flood hazard will see up to a 20% discount.
okay. We need to advertise that.
We do through our normal channels.
I don't think we have a lot of people in that district. Some of the back of Twin Rivers.
Feels like they want that.
Well, I think anyone can get up to 10%. In the special flood, it's 20%. I'll confirm that for you and send it to you about, make sure it's
Yeah, I think it's just some of the houses there in the back of the golf course side of Twin Rivers that are in it, maybe a couple on Riverside.
There's a few scattered. I can provide that as well.
Pardon?
I can provide that as well if they're scattered.
Yeah, but they're just mainly in that river corridor. Anything else? Thank you, Bobby.
And the fund balance is building. I mean, we are building at the end of next year, 14, 15, we are expected to have 322 in that fund. Now, that's not huge, but we do continue to add to that. And that's reflected in the fund balance summary that you have in the fund budget book, as well as there's an attachment. Fund balance is attachment 21. Also would reflect lines in date is that one, and it says, 331 is what your balance has at the end of the year. So that continues to increase. So the revenues are exceeding the expenditures at this point, and slowly building up that fund balance.
Next.
Special Revenue Fund, which is a building service fund, which is our contract with PDCS. Just
Attachment 10?
Attachment 10, yes, sir. Thank you.
No, thank you.
And that, I just give you some general information. The contract is through January of 2016. That's just for your information, so that next year that you're aware that we'll be going through some type of process, whether it's an RFP or a continuation that someone will bring to you. This contract is stated at 77% of the revenues are PDCS's revenues, with 23% as the city. The $127,000, $413 is a transfer out to the general fund for that 23%. I just kind of wanted to show that information to you, just so that you're aware of, when you look at the transfers, aware of what those funds were for. That's the city money. So on the city side, general fund, you'll see a transfer in from this fund of 127, and that's our 23%. The $511,513 is the 77%. It's a total operating revenue of $664,000. Their contract states that they that we as a city will provide them a facility, and that will provide certain operating costs, and those costs are about 4% of the budget, or $25,000. Those do include training hours and materials, printing costs, typical operating costs. and that has stayed pretty consistent over the last years. I believe the contract originally set up to $29,000, but it's been running a little bit less than that the last couple of years.
Any questions on that one? No. Okay, Robin.
Okay. Attachment 11 is the amended general fund, funded, unfunded, millage equivalents. In this particular one, the next paragraph, I talk about the general fund, about the difference in the millage that was presented and discussed as far as a tentative millage rate of 5.0434, presented a 0.1808 millage rate increase. The first thing we did was fund the reserves so that we were at the 15%. So that was accounted for. The next thing that the city did is we funded the 5 part-time employees as full-time employees. I'd just like to mention on this one that this, of course, is the 15 positions that were already funded as part-timers, and we just converted those folks to full-time positions. But in the meantime, we also reduced the seasonal need of positions and dollars. And the way we budget our seasonal is it's a lump sum dollar amount that we allocate out to each of the departments. Of course, 13 of these positions resided in Parks and Rec. So they reduced their seasonal salaries or seasonal line item by $45,000 to accommodate for the positions being converted from the part-time to the full-time. So no real new positions, it's just we changed their status from part-time to full-time. But we did reduce other positions, seasonal. We funded the impact study at this point in time, and I have provided in attachment 1, I believe it is, attachment 22, information on the impact team. That
So the
team-
one line item is the study, the second line item are dollars to reflect whatever the study shows.
Yes, sir. The one line item is $65,000 for the study, based on we looked at 10 different contracts that are out there, and that seems about the normal amount the cities and counties were having to pay in order to have a study, and the other $100,000 is reserved to be able to give those employees that are in critical need of an adjustment, and to look at that from the consultant's perspective as how that should be distributed.
And that's going to be a competitive bid?
Yes, sir. And we found out we have a couple people within the team, and I received some information that also my understanding is that one of our local UCF anyway will be also probably looking at something doing something very similar to this. We were hoping to have one of the people from the team sit in on our committee from UCF, but because they're going through a similar study, they will not be able to assist us. So we'll look to another city or college that also sit as part of a team member on this team to listen to the bids as well as selection and so forth. So we are actually looking at bringing others in on this process. We provided additional funding for the job growth to fund the ER expansion. The funds for this really, we looked at the fact that the JGI requirements from Digital Interactive of 24/5 would be possibly returning to the city as a reimbursement. So any amount that ends up being that reimbursement will go back into the JGI funds. So if it's whatever it might be, the dollar amount, those funds just revert back to JGI. So at this point in time, the JGI was at $30,000 in the budget last year. That $30,000 is in there this year, and then whatever funds that revert back to the city from Digital Interactive will also be incorporated in there. So whether it's 24 or a different number, those funds just go right back into that accounting stream. We adjust it accordingly. We adjusted the magistrate funding by $5,000, not the $10,000. So we originally presented to you, if you looked at your amendment, I think it was item number 1. It shows that $10,000 would be requested. We adjusted it by 5. So not the entire $10,000.
Why does he need, and I know we brought this up, why does he need this extra money? Why can't he just do what Melanie did? I mean, just putting that elephant out there.
Big question. Well,
I would just tell him
What
that,
I've been told is prep time.
well, I would tell him his prep time is the same as Melanie's, or we need a new magistrate. I mean, I'm just being,
You charge the same rate as Melanie?
I think it may be a little.
the same thing there. I mean, we had the best one here, and that just rubs me the wrong way. I mean, I'm just.
Because we really didn't recruit Melanie's recommendation for this.
Yes, we did.
I don't disagree with anybody. I would just go back and tell them, this is what you're getting paid, and if it's not enough for them, we'll find another one. It's just the principle, but it's minimal dollars, but I think what you just heard from all of us is principle. Well, 3, I don't know how the other 2 feel. Okay, 4, 5, there you go.
We said that last night.
It's not the money, it's just principle.
So would you prefer that we hold the funding at last year's levels?
And just inform the magistrate that this is what we can pay you. We love that you live here in the city. We want to have you operate as our magistrate under our city attorney's recommendation, but no, we are not increasing funding. You know, if that doesn't work for you, thank you.
And at that
Do we
point,
pay him that full amount as a flat fee, or do we pay him?
No, it's
by
billed.
yard?
It's billed. Yeah. It's monthly.
Any other questions on this one? Anything else you want to point out to us on this one, Robin?
No, sir, that was it on that one. F, though, was increase the revenues and application fees. The Development Services Department looked at the application fees submitted back in May and June, and of course, those application fees, you know, they have constant movement, so they re-updated them again. This is a position that we have funded for the last 2 years, the temporary planner, and we were not able to fund it when we presented it back to you in July. They were able to look at the projects that are out there, and we were able to fund the project through additional revenue and expected revenue in the application fee revenue stream. Since the publication of this report that I turned into you guys last week, we've also found a few additional funds. So we can, if it's council's desire, we can take this temporary planner position, convert it to a full-time permanent planner position, and include that in the budget for next year. Now, we've had a temporary planner position for the last 2 years, but we can convert that and make that a full-time position now with the additional projects that have come to light that are not out there available for us when we first put the budgets out there in May and June.
What's the pleasure of council? Anybody else?
no, I agree.
I have a different opinion. You know, quite frankly, I'd like to see the team over there reorganized a little bit and figure out what their workflow is, how they're managing their workflow. Is everyone coming to work and doing their workflow before we start throwing more bodies on board? Just my personal opinion. I'm not saying that they don't need it, they
Quite
may.
that over, but I'm leaning that way. I'd like to be convinced that we're not gonna have to lay this guy off in a couple of years. Move down. What's the justification for going full time?
Well, at this point, we have presented, and we'll be glad to present to you the information.
How many hours is the part-time working right now?
35 hours.
And is that part-timer day filled at 35 hours?
Yeah, but you're only talking 5 hours here.
I mean, you know, you got all this stuff coming online, and all it needs to do is to go take a walk in that office one day, and, you know, before they all get heart attacks, 5 hours, you're talking 5 hours here. You got all this other stuff coming on, you know, Teresa, be quick.
The temporary planner, it's, they're getting all benefits and everything, right?
No, sir.
35, they're not.
No, sir,
That's
it's a
what I mean.
temporary position. That's the
35 hours, they're
difference.
not.
Yes, sir.
So it's not just 5 hours, it then goes 5 hours to a full-time position.
That's correct. It's a full FTE, so
Right,
it becomes
that's- I
an
wasn't-
FTE.
Yeah, that was my.
So you want to turn that into a full FTE?
Yes, sir. It'd be a one FTE with benefits.
Now, is that what was asked for? That was my only thought.
And what's the total?
Was that what it was asked for?
It was asked for originally, and we were not able to be able to budget
Haven't been
that.
able to budget that way, so it's been budgeted as a temporary consistently.
Yes, sir.
Until now.
It's for the last 2 years. It's been budget.
clarify the difference in dollars that we're looking at.
It
We're
was,
looking at a temporary planner, yearly is 47,000? Why isn't it, if you already have the temporary planner, why is it listed here as 47,000?
That was 47,000 at 35 hours
To keep it temporary
To
for
keep it
another
temporary.
year?
to keep it temporary for another year, yes, sir. And that was at, if we go full-time, it's about $6,600, which is obviously the
So,
difference.
all right, so then let me rephrase my statement earlier based on that explanation. So the temporary planner is there already.
Yes, sir.
It's been budgeted each year. It costs us about that amount of money to budget it each year. Now you have a way for 6,000, 7,000, 10,000, whatever it is more than that number, to make it a permanent position.
Yes, sir.
And this is work that TDCS does not perform for us?
Correct. That's not building.
What does a planner do?
You be quiet.
I'm not saying a word.
Conversation later.
It's the,
I
coming
would,
and looking at plans and that side of it.
I'll go along with Councilwoman and Councilman Hankin on this one then. You know, if it's just a matter of increasing them to full-time, but I honestly still think that you need to look at how the workflow flows over there, you know. And, you know, not picking on anyone, it's just that it's, you know, like, building services used to be the bane of our existence. You know, quite frankly, I'm going to speak for the five of us, that's where we're getting the most complaints right now. So, that needs to be looked at. It's I'm not trying to be offensive to anybody, but something isn't right there, and we don't know what it is. But we're going to count on the two of you to figure it out and fix it. Please.
Sooner rather than later.
Yes. No, that's priority.
You know, and I don't disagree with what he's saying, but I did just want to throw one thing out, because sometimes when people get so overwhelmed and the stack of papers on your desk is just never going down, that may be your problem over there, because I don't think it's the people. I think it's more that it's just so overwhelming. And Brian, I'm going to pay you a compliment. You took a Brian Cobb out of that office who did the work of a lot, and you replaced it with somebody who is capable, but is not Brian. So I think that's something, you know, not to get too deep into it, but, you know, the workload over there is tremendous. And you got to have people in there that aren't overwhelmed. Because when people get overwhelmed, what did Mr. Miller always used to tell us? After 2.5 hours, end the meeting, because nobody's affected.
After 2 hours, so we have 45 minutes to go.
I thought we had 10 minutes.
Well, we do, but this isn't going to end in 10 minutes.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
Since it's
We're not picking on you, trust us.
Development Services Department, I have here a list of the applications in the last 3 years. 2012, we had 39 applications. 2013, we had 30 applications in the year. 2014, we had 46, and we are still 1 month and some days, before the end of the year.
How many planners do you have?
I have, right now, we have two managers, one development review manager, one planning manager, and we have one planner, Dusty, who has just been.
Right, so if you do the division, that's only 8 projects per person over the last 8 months. That's 1 a month.
But these are the main applications. This does not cover all the building permits.
Okay, so you're talking about major
These are
applications.
the major
not the fences, not
annexations,
the little
no,
things.
not
Okay.
the signage, all the
Okay.
signs, all the little things, which, if we sum, it's a lot. Plus, we had the land development code review, still to process, and we still have, meetings to do that. So it is a lot of work. It is indeed a lot of
Teresa,
work.
is this full-time, if this person goes full-time, that's the direction, does that get you to the point where you can meet these needs now?
I think that's the minimum that we would, because then we'll have 2 divisions with 2 managers and 1 planner in each division.
We have 2 managers managing a planner?
Yeah, and working too. I mean, they are the ones processing, you know, the most complicated applications, and but they need to have someone to back them up. We spend a lot of time with meetings too, because the other thing is that all the new development in the city is more complicated, right? We have the easy land is gone, so all the land that is there now requires more, you know, meetings, some development agreements, more pre-apps. So it takes a lot of time.
Well, I don't know if the rest of you agree with me, but I think maybe there's a need to upgrade our technology to make some more efficiencies out of that group, so to be a little bit more efficient and quicker.
We are also looking into that. Building will start to have the applications done electronically, all the review done electronically. But we still don't have the capabilities to do that, you know, in planning and development review. But we have already started to discuss that, yes. And we are all...
And they'll be part of the EPIC project, too.
Yes, sir. And we are reviewing our process, too. I think one thing that will help the Land Development Code, if we can simplify and, you know, make a process that we can communicate it in a more clear way to developers and have, you know, standards and that are more straightforward.
I think there's a big discussion there that we
Yeah,
have.
well, let's just back to budget.
Yes.
Thank you.
Because I wanted to share.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next item, and these will be very quick, the Seminole County Sheriff's, that was just, we brought that to you recently, so that's an increase we made to the budget, $5,000 and some change. The police department requests an additional $5,000 for overtime to support weekend events. So we had that come in.
No disrespect, but I didn't understand that, so. Because what I was thinking is that stuff that we're doing for other people that we can charge them? Because if that's the case, we should charge them. But I didn't get that one. I know it's only 5,000. I was going to ask that later. Real quick.
It's real quick. There's a lot of events, like the one that was just held in see over the weekend for the back to school. Those type of events that are city events.
Like the one at the mall?
Like the one at the mall that we're out there with.
Isn't that okay?
No,
Parks and Rec, shouldn't that be as part of that cost of that we're recouping the cost of, or?
No, those are the.
Actually, these are what, if I understand what the Chief's saying, these are for the city-sponsored events, not for the events where we have an application for a special event and we charge it back to the applicant. It's not that. This is more to cover our own.
Right, that's when we put people out there in our informational tents for city-type events, so that we have a presence out there. We're out in the community more. It's not for things we plan normally, like Coffee with a Cop or other things that is within the regular work time.
And then the last couple there, during the review of the process, staff realized that's budget office we did. We realized that we had missed the seasonal temporary employees of the $24,000 that for Avita on the Park, so we put that back in there. We funded in the proposal we presented to you for 7212, Department 7212, we funded the positions, the 5 positions, but we did not fund in that in those numbers the temporary or seasonal positions that may be needed for Parks and Rec, to have someone sit there at a ticket counter to run some of the programs that are going on and that type thing. So that's what that $24,000 is. And then just the last one there is that as we go through and make all these adjustments, there's also adjustments that happen to the, as in attachment 12 that presented that we adjust the health funds and those kind of other funds as we went through there, just without going into detail with those for you. But I would be glad to answer any questions to attachment 12 if you had it. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much the changes that we made based on your approval, tentative approval of the .1808 from the 4.86 to the 5.0434. That reflects those. And if you look back at the amended, the right attachment. Attachment 12, we'll just make sure it's the same one. You'll see those in yellow. We've highlighted those as we presented those to you so that you can look at the millage rate that those represented and anything else that you might ask on those. So just try to give you a full view of those. If there are no other questions there, I'll go on to the next one, okay? The next two items, I'll just kind of mention that those are other areas that will be handled. We presented to you the Oviedo in the Park information from the Parks Director, Drew Bulwer, and that is going to be attachment 23, Oviedo in the Park.
Actually, Robin, if I could, Council, as y'all directed in July, we went out and we started asking, we went to 3 different companies, one our own continuing services company, then also a company that's providing service to Oviedo in the Park now.
Are we on an attachment? I'm sorry.
23.
Thank you.
And there was one other company that Mr. Bulwer contacted. And basically what is provided in the attachment is, it shows you what they were willing to, services they're willing to provide. And so our next effort is going to be looking at, okay, taking the services they're willing to provide and then seeing how we supplement the services that they are not willing to provide. And what we're asking for tonight is the ability to have a work session with you on September the 15th to go over this very topic. And one thing that I'm learning about this project is that it's not like anything we've ever done before. And it has just a number of things that we're going to probably end up asking that we have multiple sessions with you to go over them as these issues arise. And so, but what we're going to try to do between now and the 15th is to be able to provide you with something that gives you an apples-to-apples comparison, which we're just not there yet. And, but I'm not, if you looked at the numbers right now, you would look at one, I think it was CFL, you'd say, oh, the city cost is $300,000, CFL's only $150. Well, they're only providing half the services. So that's why we've got to get a better handle on how the different costs compare to each other.
I'd like to just bring one thing up. But, I'm not quite sure that we have to have multiple work sessions.
Well, it's not on this one topic, but there's going to be multiple topics.
As much as I love to have work sessions, there has to be a limit somewhere.
Rick just said,
I'm of the, find the best way. I think we've made it very clear the level of service we want.
Right.
And
I just think that staff's got to take ownership of this now and deliver it to us. And, let us decide at some point when we all get together, when you have all of those numbers, if that's what we're willing to fund. Because we control the funding side, you all figure out how to do it.
Right.
And Mr. Bulwer does have to, and I'm going to speak very freely, and it's no offense to him, but he's got to get over, he can do it better himself. We have to do it the most efficient way. Whatever that way is what has to be done. And we have all said that multiple times. So for us to get together on the 15th and talk about it again, and then get together in October and talk about it again, I don't see the value of that.
I keep throwing the word and maintaining quality. You can keep saying efficiency. The quality level has to be there, but the efficiency, because it's going to be such a high quality, we want.
Now, when I mentioned that it may take multiple work sessions, I didn't mean for just this one topic.
Okay.
There's other facets of this park that we may need to.
You're going to need us for other work sessions as we go forward with, land development code, a plethora of other items. I'd hate for you to clog it up with park maintenance.
This is a huge attachment. I just don't need to see that much of that. I'm going to be honest with you. That's how I look at it. Is if he can, I don't need to go through this one by one in any workshop at all. I just need him to concisely tell us, hey, it's covered. Here's why. Here's how the parts, their part, our part. We've worked it out the best. That would be my optimal.
Yeah, right, exactly. And to piggyback on what the Deputy Mayor just said, if your bids you're getting are 150, 160, and you come to us and say, well, for 200, we could put people on staff and do it all, well, that's easy to figure out. But, we got to get off of this everyone has this number of $300,000-$400,000 in their mind. Forget that number. That number's irrelevant. Drew's guesstimate numbers, just shred them, and let's figure out what this really costs.
Brian, I think you brought up a great point. When you look at some of this stuff, some are bidding something, but they're not doing everything. I don't know if you've tried it already, but I think the common sense thing would be to, what does staff think we need? And you give it to these companies and tell them, this is what we want. Don't give us this,
No, that's what we did.
Okay. All right, so they saw what we wanted and
Yes.
chose to put it, well, then they're out.
But nobody's gonna do it. That's the thing, nobody's coming back, as we said, nobody's coming back doing it all.
Right.
They want the parts that they do, and the tree trimming, they're not gonna do on it as part of the basis. They
Well,
want
it just comes down to the point where we're asking, do we really need all of that stuff?
Can I say something too? I think that they have some things in here that they sent out to bid, but I question it. Why would you go out to bid like this? Decorations for the holiday. And there's no bid from other companies, but we say we will do it. I don't think that's a good comparison of what we would hire someone to do for maintenance, decorations.
But you have companies that do that. There's companies that specialize in that multiple times a year, and do those little flags for us, and
Right,
big
and
flags
that's where
and
it is.
whatever.
It's the hanging of the decorations. Do we do
But
that to the
don't we do
extent
that already?
We already do.
Right, and wasn't always and I'm not speaking for the council, I'm just speaking from past history of what the vision was to take everything that we're spreading around the city and concentrate it here, and make that like Crane's Roost does. So the service is being done already. All we're doing is refocusing the service. So as the councilwoman said, it doesn't even have to be big. Well, again,
So Brian, like you said, it needs a little more work and you'll get back to
yeah, let's move on.
That's it.
Next, we're done.
Like, as I said before, the multiple, what I want to mention, I need to clarify, when I mentioned that we may need.
When you said multiple work sessions, Shank had to resuscitate Councilman Brady.
No, it
Brick was just like, I'm not rerunning, I'm
It
done.
wasn't that. There are, I'll give you an example, the entertainment aspect of it. We may need to come to you for guidance on the entertainment aspect of it. It's just different things. This park is unique to anything we've ever done. And so I want to make sure that you all stay involved in that.
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but a certain deputy mayor has been saying that for 3 years. But that doesn't mean I agree with anything he said.
So that's it. No, I don't plan on coming back multiple times and saying, here's the maintenance.
Sorry, deputy mayor. I couldn't resist.
It's okay. I shot you before, so.
You'll get me somewhere along the line. Go ahead, Robin.
Okay.
What number are we on?
We are on, we're going to go to social media, number 24.
24, social media. Wow, we're up to item 3 already on our agenda. Look at that. C3.
Yes, sir. We brought this to you last October. Let's see, I just gave you a copy of the resolution that was presented, 23. And really, our concern or our question is to you. We're aware that obviously the EPIC is here looking at the city overall from a technology perspective, which includes our social media website, any of the items that we might use as far as servers and computers and just a little bit of everything. But our question to you is, what is the future of the city's social media? What does that mean?
Alive and well. Right here, the king of it all.
What does that mean to the city
That doesn't mean I
council?
want to continue doing it.
How would you like to see it expand? Something that we can mention to EPIC as they're discussing the future of the city, or something that we as the city, those of us that are already looking at the Facebook pages and Twitter feeds, what can we do that's different? Yes, sir.
Mobile apps.
That app we saw at conference was, now I don't know if they're the only ones who do it, but
How many cities use them? I'd say go first, ask the city, how many people use those?
there's about 100 of them.
I'm not saying the cities, how many people use
Oh,
them
oh,
in the
oh.
city? It's how many people pay their
What-
bills on their phone
What
from that?
was
How many
the,
people-
we got to get a hold of, what was,
So, how many
Remember
people
the-
pay electronically of ours right now, just electronically, when it's available right now? What's the percentage, rough? 5, 10, 25, 100? About 30%.
The percentage now is not what we're interested in, it's the percentage we want to get to.
Brian takes copious notes, as we all know. He probably has the woman from Public Stuff or whatever it was called.
Lily?
Yeah, I think that was it. I don't know.
Is her name?
Just go find out how many people after they've implemented these apps,
They were really,
the people the cities that are using them, what's their
you know,
usage? And not just the one that they're highlighting that's there. And find a couple others and they're talking about.
They did say that, and I'm sorry, Brian, but I think they did say the biggest portion of the app that gets used is the reporting aspect of it. You know, that's the biggest portion of it that gets used, where they can take that picture and just send it.
I'm not against any of it. I'm just saying, and that's what aspects besides all, you know, what parts.
Push information. I'm sorry.
and it's a subscription, is what it is. It's a monthly subscription. They promoted the Tallahassee. You can go on to publicstuff.com. You can see it's called Digitally, is what it's called. And it has a geographic interface in it so that you can, like the mayor said, you can take a picture of a pothole, and the geographic interface will gather the coordinates.
Right, the GPS coordinates come with it. That's all.
That goes out, and the work order gets sent to Public Works, and then also there's a little note sent back to the user. I mean, that was the one that they utilized.
Oh, right, when the pothole was complete. That's right.
Yeah, there's
Public
follow-up.
Works hits a button, it's complete,
there's a
and they get a little, the person who sent the picture gets a
Your
little.
pothole's been filled, you know. And so that was the thing. I know Mr. Britton brought up one from Lake Alfred, but it's more about communicating to emergency services. If there's an emergency, how do you get the word out? And one of the things that I was looking at, what I would like to do is try to find one app that can do all of it rather than trying to have two apps on it. And that's one of the things that we're looking at. We have Vanessa, our intern. She's one of these young ones that can do everything with their thumbs. And, you know, so
And
she's
we're not
very
necessarily
creative.
doing it for our benefit, us baby boomers, it's
Right.
millennials, that's all I use this for.
The other seminar that was, the big question was how many of you allow people to pay by PayPal? You know, and
No one raised their hand.
I don't know how many raised their
No,
hands.
remember you were there, nobody raised their hand.
You know, and it's just looking at those services that you can provide. It's really starting to think how this younger generation thinks. Really, is what it is. So it's retooling your minds as much as retooling what your infrastructure. And so I mean, those are the types of things that we can look at. Yes, the mobile app is very interesting, and how we can do that. I don't know if we can do it on the level that a Tallahassee can do it, but we can definitely look at how we can do it on our own level.
To me, it's just devising a plan.
Right.
We can't jump into it, as the mayor said. Previously, I think in an email, it's about content delivery. It's that we have a website, we have how many feeds? 4 Twitter feeds, Facebook page, 1, and we don't do what we need to do with them. So before we start going, do I want more Facebook pages? Do I want more whatever? It's, well, how do we use the Twitter feeds that there's a wreck on Mitchell Hammock and it's closed and it's shut down? And we all see that because we're getting it multiple ways possibly from the chief or whatever, or whoever. We may see it or not, but nobody's getting the Twitter feed, never seeing the Twitter feed go out on that. So, you know, that's the kind of stuff. Before we start
First, you gotta have a
taking on
Twitter
board.
account, none of us have.
I have a Twitter account. I don't see the feeds. Do you see it on the Facebook feeds? I see it from there on the Facebook feeds 99% of the time.
I'm sorry.
No, I mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a good way. But you're the guy feeding a lot of the information. And that's your point is, we need content delivery, not, and that amounts to people, time, and resources. And that's, when I hear, well, I want A or B, some other places want a Facebook page, then my first thought is going to be terrible to say, but, well, wait a minute. We're down people, we're down resources, we're down that, but we have resources and people to be able to do a Facebook page. And I will give, Parks and Rec does a great job on the website. They have all their stuff, they get great resources on the website. So, but now we want other Facebook pages. Where are we getting those resources to put the content on and keep it going?
Unless those resources exist in Parks and Rec, we bring that person over here to City Hall
Right.
to be your person, to be the content person.
Well, but they have enough to do with, again, I'm just looking at, if we're stretched right
We're stealing people from Drew.
now, but they do a
Drew's
great
not
job.
here. We can do a
They put
lot
the stuff
right
out
now.
there. I mean, I constantly, I'll go on there and get the information's up to date, current, you can find out times, things like that. It's up there.
But you might have somebody,
And they want to go somebody to another, their own, whatever page, or something else, their own page, you have a Facebook page, like, well, if our resources are thin, then where is that resource coming from?
It seems like there's a lot of different forums and venues to do this stuff, and not everyone uses the same stuff, so we're gonna probably have to have a pretty wide
and
spectrum.
well, that's
of
what the
services.
person from Orlando said when Brian and I were sitting in there. You need to have multiple
Oh,
platforms
and have you seen?
because everybody uses something different.
If you see Orlando's, they have how many websites for the city? And the guy told us when we went there, there's one person for each one of those that manages it. They had like, last time it was 28, something like that. The last time I looked, it was 28 pages. And they had a person, at least one person for each one of those. Besides the big ones, the Amway, they had multiple, they had little departments. But each one of them had their own person for each one of those pages.
Okay, so we could,
It's resource, there's a lot of resources that have, there's resources that have to go with it, and that's what I'm saying.
can we still ask?
We can't jump into that.
Pay for it?
We actually do sponsorship.
The app does some other cool things. The one that we saw, like Parks and Rec, can have a portion on it. They have like the temperature of the pool, the hours of the pool, and then somehow or another you can make that app tie right to your website, so that they just update one of them and it updates everything.
And that was the thing, the mayor and I were talking at the conference, and my vision has always been is that our social media would behave like the news agencies, where the content, as the deputy mayor said, the content's on the website, and then all the social media out there is the teasers that brings you back in. But the website's that hub where things contain. And you're right, that was one of the things when I came back and Robin and I were talking about, she said, we're going to get the people to do all this. And it was something that Mrs. Drago and I were talking about the other day, is that we've got to make it a habit. And that's what I see right now with us, in that our social media is so fledgling.
Well, you need a department.
It's not a habit yet. It's not a habit for us to put stuff out there. And maybe it's because there's not enough of us that are in that millennial generation, that we're all still in this older generation. But to me, that's it. We've got to learn to make it a habit first. And then once it becomes a habit, then you can.
And by the way, millennials are not on Facebook and Twitter at all. So
Oh, no.
they're way beyond that. We're not even,
That's
it's not even,
Instagram's becoming so yesterday.
even Instagram's
Snapchat and I don't know. You know how I figure it out when Krista comes over? I pick up her phone and I look at the apps.
What my
Oh,
daughter's
okay.
doing, exactly. What are you doing? Okay, that's what's coming up next.
That's it.
But
But that's the thing we wanted to find out. We have had requests to add Facebook pages, to add Twitter accounts. We wanted to know, are you ready to expand it now, or should we just stay with what we've got and keep operating, or is it okay for us to go in there? That's the big question.
go ahead.
Chime in here. In some aspects, I really agree with his comments. I think we need to perfect what we have and then build on it. If we try to build on something that we have that is not working 100%, that we're not utilizing, and our website really does need some work. We hear people having problems with the website. So we need to perfect what we have and then build on it. Right now, I feel like we're just like all over the place. So maybe we bring it back down and start there and then build on it. I used to say this is a thing of the future, but this is a thing of right now.
We're behind the times.
And it's, and it's really, it's way over my head and passing me by, but.
I think we have to wait for the exit, and we have a study being done that involves all this that can help us get how it all possibly works together. And I haven't seen, don't know, but hopefully it comes back and helps us to see how it all works together when planning, boom, you can go in this way and go see online where you're at in the process, things like that, that it'll all work together.
But the other issue is that we have to have a start point.
Yeah.
You know, we keep just moving that line, moving that starting line down the road. So maybe after you go through all this budget, whatever may pass in September, whatever you find as everything starts to fall into place, you can come back to us and say, okay, we've got a budget now, and we are going to start. And whatever that start is, and I know I was joking about stealing people from public work, Parks and Rec, but that person you don't might be there. You don't know. That doesn't mean we don't replace that person for them, but you might have that person on your staff, that 20-something somewhere who pays attention to all the stuff, who knows how we operate. That person may already exist. We don't know. But personally, and I'm not speaking for everybody, I'm speaking for myself, I'd like to see after we get through the budget, after we know what's left or what's not left, or, we all know how the dust settles a little bit, once you guys get to the end of the year and you know what's really happening. If you can come back and say, we have X to start, guys, whatever X is. It could be 10,000, it could be 50. I don't know. But that's what I'd like to see, and at least say, okay, on this date we started. And have somebody up there doing it. And the intern's been great. She's really nice.
She is. We had a very good
But you
training
guys had the
session.
opportunity to meet her? You should one day. She's a typical
Is she
millennial.
reverse mentoring you?
She is.
Yeah.
She is.
I actually traded services with her last week. She showed me how to use Hootsuite, and I showed her some things on PowerPoint. So,
Hootsuite gets it all, exactly.
And
I
we are
thought you were going
using
to say Lotus
Hootsuite.
Notes. No.
That's our latest, is really using Hootsuite entirely, so that it puts everything out for all the pages. That's correct. She gave us some information, that we tend to just be pushing out information and not pushing out tidbits of stuff and pictures and things like that. Exactly. So we are working with her. She's with us on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so she's been tremendous help already.
You go in there and she's got her phone, she's doing this, she's got her
Well, that's what
computer.
they told us. We went to the county. That's what he said. You want it to be, it's interactive. If you're going one way, when you're Saturday, when you said, "Oh, I saw your picture on Facebook from the fair,"
Yeah.
the festival on Saturday, it's like exactly. We need to. It's going on now. Here's what's going on. That's our.
It needs to be had.
From us, not just from there or me, on our pages. It's got to be.
And that's one of the things too, is that the one thing, and we had a discussion with the directors, the one thing that we all talked about was that if our emergency services are headed to a scene, or public works is headed to a scene, I don't want the first thought on their brains to be, what am I posting on Facebook and Twitter? I don't want that. I want it focused on, here's what I've got to do when I arrive there. What's my plan? A plan of action, we're ready. Got a plan of action, we're ready to execute. We'll take care of the Twitter stuff, and sometimes the helicopters have to fly for a while before we get there. But that's the thing that, we need to make their habit. But like I said, when we're responding to something, I want to make sure that their focus is on what they're responding to.
When you're blocking the road, if you're in Live Oak Reserve, Public Works, they did a great job. They were out there
Well,
a few months ago, and it's the greatest thing.
Right.
You're blocking the road. That's the time you think, I'm going to be blocking the road. Public Works is putting up, then that's when you tweet out, hey, we're blocking the road. We got a full kit come around the other side, and that kind of stuff.
Well, like you were saying, the city of Orlando has 28 pages. To me, I think that's too much. Right? Because people look out, they want to see Oviedo, they want to see Oviedo. It's clearly, I think, a lot, I don't use it. And once in a while, I take a peek because, it's almost today that, like, if you're not on Facebook, I can't tell you where my wife will come in and she'll tell me, what? Because I don't like Facebook. I'm not going to say I don't like it. I don't like what happens on it. But I will say this. Facebook is probably the best way to go. Because if you look at this group that's out there, this Oviedo 32765 group now, it's filled with a lot of people who are mad at everything. But it has 5,000 members very quickly. I tease the mayor all the time that he's on Facebook, but I will say that people, when they want to know something, they go on his page and ask him. So if we could have somebody who's full-time doing Facebook, maybe you can do it, right? But somebody who can get the information.
Have
do
nothing
it.
else to do.
You know, and let me tell you, if the chief is on the way to a fire and it's blocking a road, you know, maybe that person on Facebook can have a radio and he can hear it. And that's how they can get the information. You know, they can listen to it. But I think what we're doing now, it's, you know, our page is kind of boring. You know, it needs a little, you know, pizzazz, but clearly it's very popular. And I think the younger generation, I mean, that's all they are. The thumbs are going. They don't watch, they don't read newspapers, they don't watch TV. It's got to be on that phone. So, but I don't think 28 pages or multiple pages. I mean, I wouldn't, I mean.
The app we were talking about?
Yeah.
Would work off of a Hootsuite and push information out, just like
Everything.
Twitter.
Yeah.
It would work the same way, so the people who have the app on their phone, whatever you would post to Facebook, post to Twitter, post to this, post to that, post on the app. It gets pushed right out to them, according to what we saw. I mean, we didn't get to play with it.
But you gotta be careful what you put on there too. I mean, you know, whoever's putting this in has gotta have some kind of guidance and direction from somebody in authority what can go out. Because, you know, you put out a tweet or something on Facebook that scares people or is just wrong, you know, then you have a whole mess, you know?
We're very cautious there.
Yeah, so you gotta be really careful, but I would say march on. And
You know, and then part of that could be like that OpenGov type of software that we saw. But, you know, that has as much to do with staff and budgeting.
Yes,
I mean, a very small portion of that is what we get to publicly put out on the website for the residents to be able to go in and look. I mean, that, at least what Brian and I saw, you know, the back end of it is something that would help staff.
And, you know, people are hungry for it, and it's, you know, you have to pay for staff, but, you know, this group that's on Facebook, this 32765, has 4,000 or 5,000 people being run by a local real estate. So people are hungry for that. So if they see that we could do it better, you know, I mean, that page is good, but it's got a lot of bad stuff to it, too. But a lot of people signed up for it, you know, because they're interested in Oviedo and blah, blah, blah. You guys got me excited. I'm going to sign up for everything tonight.
You're going to reactivate your page?
Negative.
So we'll spend some time, do our investigative work on the softwares that are out there for mobile apps and other, and bring back a plan to you.
Put together a mobile app.
Okay.
The mobile app, the open, whatever, you know, everything that you heard us all talking about. Let's just put it all together and pick a start date.
Frank, you should be able to knock off an app in a weekend, right? There you go.
But, I mean, for the time being, stick with just what we have as far as Twitter and Facebook pages. Work with what we have, don't
Let's
expand it.
perfect it first.
Okay.
And if these other departments want their own pages, well, then maybe they should be putting forth something as a start point for what we have.
Page that we currently have.
Here's how we can help.
Offer information for that.
Right, here's how we can help Robin and Gail and everyone upstairs make this page even better than what it is and start feeding the information there.
Okay.
An interesting one is the City of Sanford, their Facebook page. It's all, I call it friendly stuff. It's pictures of sunsets on Lake Monroe and just interesting little tidbits. There isn't, you know, there's
Substance.
no substance. But it's all, it looks good.
You gotta have a little bit of the fluff, but you know, you gotta also have content or else folks won't go. You know, the only reason why the page that Councilman Henkin mentioned is because everybody goes there.
Right.
You know, and they go there and they'll post something, or they'll tag me and I'll answer it. You know, so that's, if we had somebody here doing the same thing, if the city webpage was being tagged and we had somebody answering it, they'd come to our page.
And if we sent those
Then you'd
tidbits
get
of
asked,
information out.
you'd get asked 622 times what's being built next to Jared's. But
And part of that is, again, we're back to the fact that these folks that are trying to update this information, they don't understand what they need to update and send out. They haven't been part of that. So bringing the intern in really actually opened the eyes as to what information to
Well,
send
that
out.
may be you know, we keep mentioning that for reason.
She is a communication marketing major. She's a senior at UCF.
3276665, you know, you want a lot of ideas, scroll down here and see what people keep asking us. I mean, I know you might, you know, but that's the information.
Brian monitors it.
I know, he sees it in there too. But I'm saying, that's the stuff. So whoever's looking at that, that's what they, you know, go in there. You'll see, every once in a while, there's a rotation. You can see, like, almost pick what's coming next, because somebody asked it 2 months ago, and now it's, sorry to ask this again, but I can't find the answer. And, you know, they may be, like you said, putting out little tidbits,
Right.
little reminders that we put in the mailer every once, those are the things that should be going up there is, by the way, you know, the mayor puts up, I know everyone's like, garbages, there's a garbage
Right.
holiday coming, by the way.
Pictures of this and
You
that,
know, there
just to
should be
make
going
it,
out for garbage, because, oh, it's Labor Day, well, garbage will be collected, blah, 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 no matter what, don't worry, that kind of stuff.
I'll push it. One other thing to consider as we start to build it, you know, a lot of the questions that get asked are what type of local services are there? So, you know, there could be an avenue for revenue generation, as Councilman Britton said, where maybe it's not we're selling advertising, but maybe it's you allow a business to put a little, we'll line list you for a small fee. And so that way you start to offset some of the costs. Who knows? You know, there could be, and we might not even want to get involved. I'm just saying.
we've had some requests there, so that's something.
But, you know, you go on, you follow that page, and a lot of times they're asking for the same thing. Who does sprinkler repair? Who can do my hair? Who can, you know, who fills up the helicopter with fuel? You know, that type of stuff.
Right, no, right.
All right, what else you got,
Some
Robin?
of there's helicopter fuel costs.
Yeah, that's in the budget this year. I told them.
We're going to have an economic development update in just a moment. I'm going to finish up the budget items and then let John Jones from Little John finish up the meeting. Attachment number 25, we referenced the fee schedule. Within this fee schedule are the proposed changes, including new fees, adjustments to current fees, and reductions or deletions of other fees. As you're aware, this is an annual process in which we go through each year, look at our fees. The fee changes have been included in the proposed document, in the proposed budget, as well as the proposed fee schedule. So if we need to make additional changes, we can do so and reflect those changes within our revenues. There are several new fees in that schedule. There are quite a few for Avita on the Park. The schedule is separated by the first couple of pages are administrative development, fire, those type of fees, and then the remainder of the schedule is your recreation fees, Avita on the Park proposed fees, and so forth, so that you can see what the new fees for.
Is that how we get stuff out?
That's been the latest is with Thumb Drive, yes, sir. Latest request. If it's not electronically through an email, it's through a Thumb Drive.
What is a cooler fee from Parks and Rec of $200? Anybody?
Fee is a Huntington Park facility, and any participant that wishes to enter the facility and bring their own food, we charge them $5. They can purchase food from the concession stand.
Here it says $200.
If you're renting a facility.
That's a rental facility for the pool. That's like the fee that the swim team would pay as part of the meet. So then for that swimming alone,
They can bring their coolers in?
all the parents from the swim team members can bring their own food in. We will not charge $5 per individual.
That's really necessary?
We do it all places, that's.
Okay.
Across places, we
Sandy?
do it
Okay.
all across places, that's,
All right, I'm done. Just ask the question.
I'd say, why don't, are we doing it in all the others? Are you recouping that fees at every other place we can do, as we can, you know, should?
I know this is the wrong time to ask, but it's been brought up by every one of us at some point in time. When are we going to review our development services fees? Some of them are just sky high.
I think it would be best to do it with the land development code.
We've been asking that for a long time, too.
A simple change of use shouldn't cost somebody $7,000 or $5,000, whatever it is. I'm just
Okay.
relaying to you what we get beat up on all the time.
That resubmittals.
Well, I don't mind.
I don't mind the resubmittals, but that's a whole deeper subject.
Yeah.
But that's where I'll get the
If you
biggest.
do it right the first time, you don't get
I'll
it.
get killed on the resubmittals, is I get hit more resubmittals than the actual fees, because it's,
Half.
you go, why am I getting a resubmittal? Why do I have to resubmit?
I've been getting hit lately on the zoning changes, like, you know, somebody will have a change of use in an existing plaza, and it's $5,000. I mean, it's like, you know, that's kind of silly. Now, I could see if you're trying to convert, like, a house into commercial, and there's some sort of a of a fee, but that fee becomes $10,000. That stifles economic development.
And I can address the resubmittals, because back when the fees got
Oh, I was on the committee, I remember it.
they wanted them to be.
They said, you want first time through, come in correct, and come through correctly, and you're gonna.
All right, let's move this along, because I've already
That's their deep
overstayed my welcome by 28 minutes, according to Councilman Britton.
We will bring the fee schedule, if there are no red lines, we'll bring it back to you on September the 22nd as a resolution, separate item within the agenda items that evening, so.
Before we get to economic development update, policy updates, is that you, Robin?
Yes, sir.
All right, so you're going to finish that up, then we'll finish up with John?
Yes,
Is that
sir.
what we're doing? Okay.
So policies is item number 26. Very similar. Most of these updates in the policies actually are just changing our city manager's name. So we went through the process of doing that.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
We made the change from the previous city manager to the new city manager. Even though Brian was effective last year, we did not bring those to you last year. So we're bringing those to you this year to make those changes. The other changes we actually addressed for you, the budget guidelines, there were some Scribner errors. We also changed the CIP from 5 years to 10 years. Communication guidelines, again, that's one that we will bring to you probably every 2 or 3 months, because there are changes from a media perspective that are constantly updating, and that will adjust that schedule or that process, SOP, and bring to you each time that happens. The flyers and announcements, just including some public safety and crime prevention verbiage on there. Travel reimbursement, we clarified the exclusion definition as to lodging, local lodging within adjacent counties, and before it was not in there as such. And then we added a couple of new SOPs for equitable sharing accounts, which is your forfeiture funds, so that we follow the state and federal requirements on the use of those funds, and the fact that those go through the police chief as approval, then to the city manager, then to you as the council. And then the health reimbursement plan fund, that may actually be one that we add to another SOP in the future, so that's just one we want to address for now, but we may adjust another couple SOPs between now and the September 22nd. We'll send those out to you separately. At the September 22nd meeting, we will present to you a resolution to adopt the SOPs. We'll also present to you the book of all the SOPs printed out, so that you have the new updated one, so that you have it available, unless you would just like it on a thumb drive or send it to you electronically, then you can let me know, and I'll be glad just to reduce the numbers.
Just post it up on the intranet?
It will be posted on the intranet, but
Anybody wants a printed copy, ask for a
yes,
printed copy.
let me know, otherwise,
I'd
yes.
rather-
Do you guys remember years ago when we used to get the Code of Ordinances books?
I think we still have it.
I gave mine back.
They are posted right now. The current SOPs are on the intranet, so you can actually get to those now.
Actually, remember years ago, we used to get the phone call, please bring your book down because we need to update it. Keith, you still have your Code of Ordinance book?
My favorite bookshelf.
That's all I have. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have. Otherwise, I would be glad to turn it over to John Jones for.
Do we have anything, or are we going to roll on to John? Good. Thank you.
All right, John, you got 5 minutes.
So after John, we adjourn, right? Hi, John.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Adjourned.
All right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the council, Madam Clerk, Mr. Cobb. Pleasure to be here this evening. I'm John Jones with Little John. I'm here to make available detailed information about the City of Oviedo's Economic Development Program, past, present, and future. However, at the pleasure of the council, there is a more time-sensitive and pressing issue that I'd like to discuss at this evening's meeting.
Go ahead, John. John, it's your show.
Very good.
Move forward how you see fit.
Very good. I'll continue to make outreach to the various council members to make myself available in the upcoming days to provide individual briefings. So you've probably all received a phone call from me or met with me in the past week. So thank you very much for making yourselves available. Ms. Hayes introduced the item earlier this evening. What I'm here tonight to do is to seek consensus from the council to authorize staff to pursue a $12,000 refund of a JGI award. A little background. In 2012, the City of Oviedo awarded Design Interactive $24,000 to create 12 new jobs and retain those jobs for a 2-year period. Design Interactive has recently relocated to the UCF Quadrangle outside of the city of Oviedo. The JGI agreement has a clawback clause in it that allows the city to retrieve incentive dollars if the terms of the agreement are not fully satisfied. Design Interactive has partially satisfied the terms of the agreement. A prorated award refund is applicable. There have been multiple interpretations of the agreement and the performance bond, and the city interpretation was initially that the company is due to return $16,000 to the city. The interpretation proffered by Design Interactive was that they wish to return $33,540. Subsequent discussion with the company and city attorney has yielded a $12,000 refund compromise being placed on the table before us this evening. So to reiterate, I am here seeking consensus to authorize staff to pursue the $12,000 refund of the JGI award for partial satisfaction of the terms and conditions of the performance agreement with Design Interactive.
Brian, do you have anything to add to that? If we think it should be 16 and it's 12, I mean, I'm going to assume that litigation is just going to be...
That was, when we consulted with Mr. Groot, that was the big thing. I mean, what triggered all this was that we got a notice from the insurance company saying that they were going to get the bond back. Right. And they were going to do it this Wednesday. They gave us 10 days notice. And so if we go for the 16, we'll have to go with the clawback of the bond. And that has negative ramifications both to Design Interactive as well, and I think as well as to the city of Oviedo. They come in with the 12. Yes, Mr. Groot has advised that if you provoke litigation with these folks, that you'll spend more than the 12 trying to get the 12, basically. We think getting the 12 avoids us calling the bond. That way we don't cause those negative ramifications of calling the bond. And it's not far off from our interpretation as well. And it gets us about half of what we originally awarded.
What's your recommendation, Brian?
My recommendation would be to take the 12, be done with it.
Council have any questions? Everybody okay with that?
Just consensus, yes, sir.
Yeah, my consent.
Good?
Very good.
Done.
Thank you very much, mayors, members of the council.
Anything else for us, John?
No, sir. I'll continue the outreach to the individual commissioners to get those briefings done in the next week. Yes, ma'am.
You said there were some discrepancies when they looked at it and when we looked at it.
Yeah.
Are you working to correct that so that there's no misunderstanding?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, we will insert some more detailed language into the definition of pro rata satisfaction of the terms of the performance agreement so that this does not happen again.
Okay.
Yeah, there's many lessons learned.
The young program that did what it was supposed to do, and we're not that far off. So by the time we litigated, it will all be gone, and just the lawyers will be Anybody have any other questions for Mr. Jones? No? John, thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much.
If I knew that was all you had, I would have brought you up when you walked in.
That's okay. We've got more, but
You're going to
we'll brief
meet
you
with us.
individually.
Yeah, actually, Mitch and I, we were going to try to talk about what we've accomplished and where we would like to go. But with the time constraints, we just felt it was better to go ahead and take care of the Design Interactive issue. That's the issue at hand right now.
Correct.
We can take care of the other stuff later.
Is that the same conversation we had?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
Very good. Thank you.
All righty. Mr. Cobb, I will turn this back over to you. Do you have anything else for us?
We have covered everything tonight. I do appreciate you all giving us your input once again. That's been our goal with this entire budget process, that we want it to be interaction between y'all and us, and that when we get the budget adopted, that it's your budget that you have given your input on and what you wanted us to do to carry forward in 14-15. So once again, I thank you very much. And I also want to recognize the staff members who have worked diligently and worked incredibly hard on putting this together. So I just wanted to finish with that, Mr. Mayor.
everyone has done an exceptional job. I think every member of council has said that at one point or another. And we are very appreciative of all the effort put into it and the transparency that you are providing with it. Yes, it does take a little bit more of our time, but I think in the end, it'll really be fruitful. Is there any other order of business before us?
When do we vote on the millage rate officially on the?
You have-
Mid-September, end
You
of
have two
September?
public hearings coming up. The first public hearing is going to be Monday, September the 8th. Your second public hearing, which is going to be your adoption hearing, is the 22nd. You'll also be, that night will also be the night that we'll bring the fees for final adoption, and we'll bring the policies for final adoption on those nights, that night as well. So that's why we're giving them to you tonight, so that you have time to look over them. If you have any questions, get with us so that we can address them.
Anything else?
Everybody.
Nope. We're adjourned.